Hey everyone, welcome into episode 6 of my interactive tutorial. If this is the first episode you're watching, be sure to download the park in the link below. This whole process is designed so that you can follow along in the park yourself as I kind of teach you these various techniques that myself and others use in the game. So at the end of the last episode, I mentioned this was going to be devoted to sort of path terrain interaction, as well as just some general terrain techniques that I use. And I know are fairly common among a lot of the YouTubers in the community. So this whole sort of little plaza path thing I created by first elevating the terrain. And in the last episode we built this, which is great, but it also leaves you in a position where you have to try to hide the curbs, and also the terrain, the hitboxes on the paths are pretty substantial relative to the terrain. So I mean, I can't even get within probably 3 or 4 feet of the actual terrain to edit this. So that obviously creates a problem. So the solution to that is if you know the level that you want your final path to be at, you can take a flat roof piece. So we'll just do like this concrete roof piece here. And if you sink it into the ground so it's at the level of the path, you can bring that over to a blank space like this. And we'll create like a nice little rectangle. And then this is where the terrain tool comes into play. So I'm going to turn the intensity down a little bit. Just generally speaking, when you're working with the terrain tool, it's best to keep a smaller size and a lower intensity. Typically around like 30 to 40% is where I like to work. Sometimes I'll bump it up all the way to 100, like if I'm trying to use the flattened foundation, or if I'm painting the terrain, there's times where I might increase the intensity, but generally speaking, the size, anywhere from 1 to probably 4 meters is the sweet spot, I think. So what we're going to do here to level out the ground, so we want to first create that, just get the land kind of above it a little bit, and then we'll take the flatten the foundation tool. Now, similar to how the paths work, like, I mentioned in the last episode, the paths will highlight the ones that you're working on. The same thing here. So those 2 circles are going to tell you where your terrain level is going to end up. So if I do this to right here, it's all going to end up kind of slightly above this cement. But remember, the paths have a pretty decent hitbox, so I'm actually going to go a little bit below this because I want my final path to be about at this level, so I'm going to go a little bit below. That's probably good there. And then I'm just going to hold down the flatten to surface key here. And then we'll create a little platform. I think I got all of it. So delete this. Kind of get down. Yeah, so see, I missed a spot. So flatten to terrain. All right. Now, what I can do, and this works well if you're trying to, why did it do that? That was weird. This works well if you're trying to, like, bridge the gap between 2 areas that you want to be the same height. And so, yeah, there you go. Now, the path is exactly level to that terrain, and now you don't have to have the curb, so this opens up more flexibility in terms of what you would do sort of on the boundaries of this. You aren't going to have that curb sticking through anything that you might put over top of it. Now from here, you don't want to just create, you know, what a lot of times I see is this, where you'll have an elevated thing like this and you just try to smooth it out. So, you know, smooth it or gradually bring up this terrain. And actually, we're going to have to delete these. Okay. So one thing I can do then, since we already, the good thing is this is actually a good problem to have happen in this, because you can see typical things that you'll run into. So go back to the flatten to foundation, and we're going to bring it out further than we actually need it to be. What's going on there? Weird. Okay. And then we'll go back to our paths. Okay. So typically what I'll see is something like this, where you have a steep drop off to the next level, or, you know, maybe not quite that bad. Let's see if this smooth works. Yeah, something like this, which to your eye it looks fine. But if you bring a peep in here, or the little animatronic guy, that is a really steep grade. That grade is really steep. So the path will actually allow you to go down it, but that's not something that you typically would see someone actually walking down. So how do we make the transition from this top area to the bottom area smoother? And that's also where the flatten the foundation tool comes in. So go about 40%, 4 meters is probably good. What this is going to do is it's going to equalize the terrain to where the mouse pointer is. So it's going to bring the terrain from the left up and lower the terrain on the right. It's going to try to meet in the middle. So what you can do is if you just click very lightly and sort of feather it away, you can start to give yourself a gradual slope. Now, adjusting from a height like that down to this level is going to take a pretty good runway to make it, you know, not so steep. But this is typically what I do to bring that down, and it takes honestly a lot more tweaking than what I'm gonna do right here. You know, you really have to be patient with it and kind of go slow. But then once you've got a decent amount done, you can get in and start to kind of smooth it. And when I'm doing this, I'm just completely holding down the smooth button and allowing it, as I pass over stuff, to kind of do its thing. So, but the benefit of this is when you do a path now, come here maybe. It's much more gradual and slope. You know, here's probably still a little bit too steep, but overall you're getting a much better transition. So that's one way you can kind of manipulate the terrain and path together, where you aren't reliant on just raising it above the terrain level. And then to create something like this, like a cliff face, that's the other main tool that I use in the terrain. So the primary tools I use are pull, push, flatten to foundation, flatten to surface, but not all that often with this. This is probably the one that I use least frequently. Smooth is one as well. I hardly ever use roughen or chisel, but if you want to create a cliff face, the easiest way to do that is you want to raise up the terrain, and then here, we'll do this. So you can, if you have something rounded like this and you want it to be more of a vertical cliff face, what you can do is, if you really get down to like the 1 meter, you want to start building out a point so that this white circle is sitting vertically. So if you do flatten to surface, it's going to flatten to that circle. So now, here we'll do the circle a little bit wider. 3. So there you go. Now if you move it in either direction, you're going to get a cliff face. Now I wouldn't leave it like that, like I would continue to tweak it some more. So now maybe you come in and you do flatten to foundation. And you bring that area up a little bit. Now, if you look at like photos of landscaping and just nature in general, you know, you might have a severe cliff face like this, but it also might have like a subtle transition at the base. You know, something like that. And then once you have that face there, you can then build up the rest behind it. You know, and fill it in however you want. One thing that I think I can 100% recommend you do is give yourself a custom paint textures for the terrain. Because if you add in, it's probably a little bit high, go like 30. If you add in some of this detail, it can really make, you know, the entire thing shine. So, and we'll get in more into this in the next episode. So that just about does it for episode 6. Hopefully you guys have a better grasp on ways you can kind of manipulate the paths and terrain together to maybe achieve some results you couldn't have otherwise. Again, if you haven't had the opportunity, click the link in the description to download the park yourself, and you can follow along as we go through these different stations. In episode 7, I'm going to be joined by Mike Sheets from the Bro Coaster series. He is an expert when it comes to landscaping, and that is going to be the topic for the next episode. He's going to create a nice little scene for us that then he's going to recreate on camera for us to follow along with. Episode 8 is going to be less sort of hands-on and more just a general discussion about certain design topics like scale and size in the game. We'll talk about color, we'll talk about lighting, things of that nature. So stick around for both of those, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you in episode 7.